Thank you very much, Congressman Brian Mast. We now proceed to Congresswoman Kathy Manning of North Carolina.
Thank you to my friends, Chairman Wilson and Ranking Member Phillips, and thank you to our witnesses for being at this very important hearing. We all know that Iran is the principal source of instability in the region. It is a major threat to our U.S. interests and the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. But an Iran armed with nuclear weapons would represent an even greater, entirely unacceptable threat. And that is why now is the time to maintain pressure on Iran and continue to enforce strong economic sanctions that we have in place. But as we've discussed today, that doesn't seem to be enough. So, Mr. Rule, can you talk to us a little bit more? I know you've started the discussion under prior questions, but what should the proper approach look like? And you mentioned earlier that what we need is a consistent multilateral pressure, that is the only thing that works. I wonder if, first of all, can you elaborate on that? But also, can you give us an example of when that consistent multilateral pressure has worked?
Thank you, ma'am. In 2014, Iran came to the negotiating table because a number of drivers were present, most of which are absent today. Great power unity, the United States with Russia and China. The Obama administration had put in place the most significant amount of sanctions that had ever been placed on Iran. And truth in lending, they would have called it, I was there, maximum pressure, but that just hadn't been thought of. But it was perceived at the time that that was maximum pressure, and the Iranians thought pressure would be greater. We had routine, large American military forces in the region. We were still in Iraq and Afghanistan. We had unity with the Gulf states and with Europe that more pressure against Iran was needed. This brought Iran to the table. That doesn't mean Iran came to the table for any deal. It just came to the table. What you need is a policy in which Iran believes its options to escape pressure don't exist. And that's difficult with Europe. It's difficult with Russia now and China. But if Iran believes that sanctions are not significant or not serious, and the sanctions on Iran's oil industry do not appear to be enforced as robustly as they should be, it tells the Iranians they have not yet reached our red lines. And it's a very dangerous situation. I gave a list of a number of things Iran has done, and none of those things provoked military action by the United States or robust sanctions action. If that doesn't do it, if you're in Tehran, your answer is probably, I bet I can go a little farther.
In light of what's happened with the war in Ukraine, in light of the need for energy in many of the European countries, and in light of the burgeoning relationship between Iran and Russia's need for the drones that Iran is supplying, how realistic is it to establish a consistent multilateral pressure, the kind that you are describing?
It's not likely at all.
So what are our other options?
Our other options are unilateral sanctions, working with Europeans and convincing other states to stand with us. It's not the strongest play that we've had. But as other policymakers have stated, you go to war, economic, diplomatic, or military, with the army you've got. And that's the current world that we now face. But we should say there is a response. There's also an action that will happen if we don't occur. We often talk about what are the consequences of steps. There are going to be consequences to non-action as well. And you should consider that, ma'am, as you're in policymaking.
Thank you. Ms. Maloney, can you comment on the same kind of question? You talked about the need for a new approach. You gave some examples, but can you elaborate on that?
Thank you very much. Again, I agree with a lot of what my fellow panelists has had to say. The conditions that we face today for multilateral diplomacy are far less positive in terms of really marshaling a coalition to apply the same level of pressure that brought Iran to the negotiating table starting in 2013. But I also would commend Congress to think about what the United States has done over the past several years with respect to the challenge from China. It was unimaginable that we would have been able to marshal the pressure that we have, to build the consensus that we have, to broker a better relationship, for example, between the Koreans and the Japanese, to build AUKUS, to create a wider coalition of states that are prepared to take risks and prepared to apply pressure when they understand that there's a challenge and also that they understand the United States is prepared to lead. I think the same can be done with respect to Iran. It's going to be an uphill climb. We're going to have to examine the trade-offs between applying pressure to Iran and what that means for our own economy and what it means for our policy toward China. But unfortunately, we have made Iran policy subsidiary to these other much larger challenges, and it has fallen off the radar. I think it's obviously, as you can tell from the consensus amongst us, it's really time to put it back front and center on the U.S. policy agenda.
Thank you. My time has expired, but thank you all for your testimony. I yield back.